What if everything you've been taught about the gods is just the surface, a mere glimpse into a world far more mysterious and thrilling than you ever imagined? Think about the myths you learned in school: Zeus hurling thunderbolts, Odin ruling Valhalla, Ra sailing the sun across the sky. But what if these familiar figures were just the beginning? Hidden in the shadows of history, there's an entire pantheon of rival gods, deities so powerful, so controversial, that their stories were almost erased. These forgotten figures weren't just footnotes, they were game changers, shaping the beliefs of ancient civilizations through fierce battles, secret alliances, and cosmic power struggles. And today, we're pulling back the curtain on 26 of the most astonishing divine rivals you've never heard of. Picture this: a god so feared that their name was scrubbed from temples, another who nearly toppled the most powerful pantheon in their culture, and a goddess whose rivalry sparked wars between nations. These aren't just myths, they're echoes of real human drama, reflecting the ambitions, betrayals, and hidden histories of the people who worshipped them. Every culture has its winners and losers, and the gods are no different. But why were these rivals sidelined? Was it politics, fear, or something darker? The answers will rewrite how you see ancient myths, revealing a world where divine power was never as simple as it seemed. This journey isn't just about uncovering lost gods. It's about understanding the hidden forces that shaped civilizations. From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the jungles of Mesoamerica, these rival deities tell stories of cultural clashes, stolen worship, and divine rebellion. And the first god on our list, their story is so explosive, so pivotal, that it's a miracle it survived at all. Get ready to meet a figure who defied the heavens, challenged the status quo, and left a mark so deep their rivals tried to erase them from history. The question is, will you remember their name when we're done? Because these gods, they're about to take center stage again. The idea of rival gods isn't just about forgotten myths, it's about the hidden battles that shaped entire belief systems. Think of ancient religions not as fixed pantheons, but as shifting battlegrounds where gods rose and fell like kings. For every Zeus or Odin who claimed the throne, there were challengers, deities who refused to kneel, whose stories were whispered rather than carved in stone. These rivals often emerged from the edges of empire, from conquered lands or rebellious sects, their myths surviving in fragments, a half-erased inscription, a folk tale passed down in secret, a single line in a hymn that hints at a much older struggle. Take the way invading cultures rewrote divine history. When one civilization absorbed another, their gods didn't just vanish, they were transformed. Some were merged into the victor's pantheon as lesser figures, their power diluted. Others were recast as villains, demonized to justify conquest. Imagine a local storm god, once the heart of his people's worship, reduced to a footnote in the epic of a foreign sky deity. These weren't just theological shifts, they were power plays, proof that myths could be weapons as sharp as swords. But why does this matter today? Because these rival gods reveal the fractures in history's official story. They show us where cultures clashed, where dissent simmered, where the losing side refused to be erased. A goddess might fade from temple carvings, but her followers could keep her alive in secret rites for centuries. A rebellion in heaven often mirrored rebellion on earth. When empires fell, old gods sometimes roared back to life. So who was the first to defy the cosmic order? Picture a deity so bold they challenged the very fabric of creation, a figure whose defiance echoes in myths across the world. Their story begins not with worship but with rebellion, and it starts where you'd least expect. Apep isn't just a monster, he's the ultimate cosmic rival, the serpent who dared to swallow the sun itself. Every night in Egyptian mythology, as Ra sailed his solar bark through the underworld, Apep lurked in the darkness, waiting to strike. This wasn't just a battle, it was the ultimate showdown between order and chaos, light and oblivion. If Apep won, the sun wouldn't rise and the world would plunge into eternal night. But here's the twist, Apep wasn't just a mindless villain. Some ancient texts hint that chaos like his wasn't purely evil. It was a necessary force, the shadow that made the light meaningful. Without Apep's threat, Ra's victory would hold no power. The Egyptians took this rivalry deadly seriously. Priests performed elaborate rituals, crafting wax models of Apep to stab, burn, and trample, symbolically ensuring the serpent's defeat so the sun could rise. Imagine the tension, an entire civilization holding its breath each dawn, their rituals a desperate gamble against chaos. But Apep wasn't the only rival in Egypt's pantheon. Enter Set, the god of storms and violence, who murdered Osiris and fought Horus in a battle that split the heavens. While Apep represented external chaos, Set embodied internal strife, the kind of conflict that reshapes dynasties. Together, they show how Egyptian mythology framed duality, not just good versus evil, but balance versus disruption, tradition versus revolution. Yet Apep's story goes deeper. Some scholars argue he was demonized because he represented forces too terrifying to acknowledge, the inevitability of entropy, the chaos that precedes renewal. Think of a forest fire, destructive, yes, but also clearing the way for new growth. Could Apep, the so-called enemy of creation, have been a hidden architect of rebirth? It's a provocative idea, one that challenges us to rethink how ancient cultures grappled with the darker sides of existence. Now, imagine a god who didn't just lurk in the shadows but ruled them, a figure who turned the underworld into a throne and defied the heavens from below. Our next rival didn't just challenge the gods, he rewrote the rules of the game, proving that even the mightiest pantheons could be shaken from beneath. Ereshkigal didn't just rule the underworld, she owned it. While her sister Ishtar bathed in the adoration of Babylon, worshipped as the goddess of love and war, Ereshkigal held court in the realm of the dead, a place so terrifying even gods feared to tread. Their rivalry wasn't just familial, it was a clash of cosmic domains, life against death, light against darkness. And when Ishtar, in all her arrogance, decided to march into the underworld uninvited, Ereshkigal didn't just challenge her, she broke her. The descent of Ishtar is one of mythology's most brutal power plays. Stripped of her robes and jewels at each of the underworld's 7 gates, the goddess of love arrived naked and powerless before Ereshkigal's throne. Here's the twist, Ereshkigal didn't kill her. She did something far worse, she let her rot. Ishtar's corpse hung on a hook like discarded meat, a humiliating reminder that even the mightiest deities bowed to death. The world above withered in her absence, love vanished, wars stalled, life itself froze until the gods begged for her release. But Ereshkigal didn't surrender, she negotiated, forcing Ishtar to send a replacement to the underworld. This wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was a masterclass in leverage. Modern scholars see Ereshkigal differently, not as a villain but as a sovereign. Where Ishtar thrived on chaos and passion, Ereshkigal embodied order and inevitability. Her realm wasn't hell, it was the ultimate equalizer where queens and beggars alike became dust. Some feminist readings even cast her as a proto-feminist figure, a goddess who carved out absolute authority in a world dominated by male deities. She didn't just accept her role as Queen of the Dead, she weaponized it, turning the underworld into a seat of unmatched power. Yet Ereshkigal's story has a haunting footnote. In some versions of the myth, she wasn't always the feared ruler of the underworld. She was tricked into it, dragged down by the very gods who found her too dangerous to roam free. That changes everything. Was her harshness born of bitterness, or was it the only way to survive in a pantheon that feared her? Either way, her tale forces us to ask, what's more terrifying than a goddess of death? One with a grudge. Now imagine a rivalry even more intimate, a divine rebellion where the challenger isn't a sibling but a child. What happens when the next generation rises up, not to share power but to seize it? Loki wasn't just a trickster, he was the wild card of Norse mythology, a god who danced on the line between ally and enemy, weaving chaos into the very fabric of the Aesir's world. While Odin and Thor embodied order and strength, Loki was the spark in the shadows, the one who questioned, undermined, and sometimes saved the gods with equal flair. His relationship with Odin was especially twisted, blood brothers in one moment, bitter adversaries in the next. Odin, the all-seeing, seemed to tolerate Loki's mischief, almost as if he understood that chaos was necessary to keep the cosmos from growing stagnant. But Thor, their clashes were legendary. Picture this: Thor's hammer stolen, his pride dented, and Loki grinning as he orchestrated the chaos, only to swoop in later with a solution that left everyone indebted to him. That was Loki's game, no clean victories, only calculated disruptions. Yet his rivalry with Heimdall, the ever-vigilant guardian of the Bifrost, reveals something deeper. These two were destined to kill each other at Ragnarök, a feud written into the stars. Heimdall, the watchman who could hear grass grow, versus Loki, the shapeshifter who could slip through any crack. Their battles weren't just physical, they represented the eternal struggle between transparency and deception, between the world as it was and the world as it could be. In one lesser-known tale, Loki steals Freya's necklace, and Heimdall hunts him down, transforming into a seal to outwit the trickster in a battle of wits beneath the waves. Even in defeat, Loki left his mark, proof that even the gods couldn't fully contain him. Modern scholars still argue over Loki's true nature. Was he a villain or just a necessary force of change? Norse mythology doesn't deal in simple morals. Without Loki's schemes, the gods would never have gained their greatest treasures: Thor's hammer, Odin's spear, even the walls of Asgard itself. But his role in Baldur's death and his leadership of the forces of chaos at Ragnarök paint a darker picture. Maybe Loki wasn't good or evil, but something far more unsettling: a mirror. He reflected the gods' own flaws back at them, exposing their hypocrisy, their fears, their fragile order. Now, imagine a rivalry so explosive it didn't just shake a pantheon, it shattered it. Our next god didn't just challenge the divine hierarchy, he tore it apart, dividing heaven itself into warring factions. This wasn't mischief, this was outright rebellion. Susano didn't just leave heaven, he tore through it like a storm. When the Shinto god of the sea and tempests defied his sister Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess, his rebellion wasn't subtle. He upended celestial order, hurling a flayed horse into her sacred weaving hall, shattering the peace of the heavens. The act was so violent, so deliberately chaotic, that Amaterasu retreated into a cave, plunging the world into darkness until the other gods lured her out. Susano's punishment, exile, but here's where the story twists. His chaos wasn't just destruction, it was transformation. Cast down to earth, Susano's wild energy took a different turn. In one of Japan's most famous myths, he encountered a grieving family forced to sacrifice their daughters to the eight-headed serpent Yamata no Orochi. Susano didn't just slay the monster, he outsmarted it, luring it with vast quantities of sake before cutting it down with his sword. Inside the serpent's tail, he found the legendary Kusanagi blade, a treasure he'd later offer as reconciliation to Amaterasu. This duality, destroyer and hero, runs deep in Susano's lore. In some regions, he's worshipped as a protector of travelers and a bringer of rain, his tempestuous nature reframed as life-giving rather than destructive. Yet interpretations of Susano vary wildly. Official Shinto texts often paint him as a disruptive force, his clashes with Amaterasu symbolizing the tension between order and chaos. But in local folk traditions, especially in Izumo, he's a cultural hero, a god who turned his exile into a chance to defend humanity. Scholars argue this split reflects Japan's own historical shifts, centralized power favoring Amaterasu's orderly reign, while regional communities clung to Susano's rebellious spirit. So was he a villain or a champion? The answer might lie in the question itself. Susano forces us to reconsider what rivalry means in myth. Can a god be both adversary and ally? Can chaos in the right hands become a tool for good? His legacy suggests that even the most disruptive forces can carve paths to unexpected heroism. Now imagine a rival whose story wasn't just suppressed by myth but by conquest. Our next deity faced an enemy far more ruthless than any serpent, colonialism's erasure. Their name survived not in temples but in whispers, a testament to resilience against forces that sought to wipe them from history entirely. Huitzilopochtli didn't just defeat his sister, he made her a warning. In Aztec mythology, the hummingbird god of war and the sun didn't merely overthrow Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess, he shattered her. The myth goes like this. Their mother, Coatlicue, became miraculously pregnant after a ball of feathers touched her, sparking outrage among her existing children. Led by Coyolxauhqui, they plotted to kill their mother for this perceived disgrace. But Huitzilopochtli, born fully armed, sprang from the womb and slaughtered his siblings, beheading Coyolxauhqui and hurling her body down the sacred mountain of Coatepec. Her dismembered limbs became the moon, a celestial reminder of his ruthless dominance. This wasn't just a family feud, it was political theater. The Aztecs, who rose from obscurity to build an empire, saw themselves in Huitzilopochtli's rise. His victory over Coyolxauhqui mirrored their own conquests, justifying their expansion as divine will. Temples like the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan literally embodied this myth. Coyolxauhqui's stone disk lay at the base, symbolizing the defeated, while Huitzilopochtli's shrine crowned the top. Every sacrifice, every captured warrior hurled down the steps reenacted her fall. The message was clear: resistance meant annihilation, yet the Spanish conquest twisted this narrative. Chroniclers like Bernardino de Sahagun recorded these myths, but through a colonial lens, framing Huitzilopochtli as a demonic figure to justify eradicating Aztec religion. Temples were demolished, texts burned, and the hummingbird god's name was scrubbed from public worship, but fragments survived. In the 20th century, construction workers in Mexico City unearthed Coyolxauhqui's massive stone disk, buried but intact, her story screaming back to life after centuries of silence. Modern scholars see layers in this rivalry. Some argue Coyolxauhqui wasn't just a victim. She represented older lunar cults, perhaps even a matriarchal order Huitzilopochtli's patriarchy crushed. Others note how the myth echoes real tensions between the Aztecs and neighboring peoples they subjugated. The most haunting question, whether Coyolxauhqui's fate was a prophecy. When the Spanish arrived, the Aztec Empire fell as violently as she had, its pieces scattered like limbs across history. Now, picture a rivalry so foundational it didn't just shape a pantheon, it defined a civilization's soul. The next god's conflict wasn't merely about power, it was about identity, a battle so profound that losing it meant vanishing from history itself. Tiamat wasn't just a goddess, she was the beginning of everything, the swirling chaos of saltwater that birthed the gods themselves. In Babylonian mythology, she existed before time, a primordial force of creation alongside her consort Apsu, the fresh water. Together, they formed the cosmic womb from which all life emerged. But when their offspring, the younger gods, grew too loud and restless, Apsu plotted to destroy them. What happened next reshaped the cosmos. One of the younger gods, struck first, slaying Apsu and claiming his power. Tiamat, once a nurturing force, became something else entirely, a mother-turned-monster, a force of vengeance. She birthed an army of demons and dragons, appointing her new consort, Kingu, as their leader. The stage was set for a war that would decide the fate of existence. Enter Marduk, the storm god and champion of the younger generation. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, paints his victory over Tiamat as heroic, a cosmic battle where he traps her in a net, shoots arrows into her belly, and splits her body like a clamshell, using one half to form the heavens, the other to craft the earth. Her tears became the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, her skull the vault of the sky. But here's the question scholars still debate. Was Tiamat truly a villain, or was she a victim of divine betrayal? Some interpretations suggest her rage wasn't mindless destruction, it was grief. The gods she created had murdered her mate, and her rebellion was less about chaos than justice. The Enuma Elish, written to glorify Marduk and his city of Babylon, might have rewritten her story to justify a new order, one where male gods dominated and the old matriarchal forces were recast as threats. Look closer, and Tiamat's legacy is everywhere. Her name shares roots with the word for sea across ancient languages, hinting at her role as the original mother of life. Even her defeat carries irony. Marduk's ordered world was built from her corpse, a reminder that creation and destruction are forever intertwined. Modern feminist readings reclaim her as a symbol of resistance, a goddess demonized for refusing to fade quietly into the past. Her story isn't just myth, it's a reflection of how power rewrites history, turning the old god into monsters to legitimize the new. Now, shift your gaze from the cosmic to the mortal realm, where a different kind of rival stirred rebellion not among gods, but in the hearts of the oppressed. The next deity didn't just challenge divine hierarchy, he became a rallying cry for those who refused to bow. Prometheus didn't just steal fire, he ignited rebellion. In Greek mythology, his act was more than theft. It was a direct challenge to Zeus's absolute rule, a defiance that reshaped humanity's destiny. While Zeus hoarded divine power, keeping mortals weak and subservient, Prometheus saw potential in them. He smuggled fire from Mount Olympus, gifting humans not just warmth, but the spark of civilization, art, science, and ambition. Zeus's punishment was legendary, chaining Prometheus to a rock, where an eagle tore out his regenerating liver every day for eternity. But here's what makes this rivalry unforgettable. Prometheus never bowed. Even in agony, he held secrets Zeus craved, prophecies of the king's eventual downfall, proving that knowledge, once unleashed, couldn't be fully controlled. This wasn't just a Greek story. Across cultures, trickster figures paid dearly for lifting the veil between gods and mortals. In Norse myth, Odin hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 nights to steal the runes, while the Yoruba god Orunmila faced exile for sharing divination with humans. These tales reveal a pattern. The gods' greatest fear wasn't humanity's weakness, but their potential. Fire symbolized more than flames. It was autonomy, the power to question, create, and eventually outgrow their creators. Prometheus's suffering mirrors real struggles against oppressive systems, from ancient tyrants to modern censorship. His name means forethought, a clue that his crime wasn't impulsiveness, but deliberate insurrection. Zeus's brutality backfired. By making Prometheus a martyr, he cemented the Titan's legacy as a symbol of resistance. Artists from Aeschylus to Mary Shelley recast him as a tragic hero, his chains echoing in every fight for human rights. Even today, his story asks, is progress a gift or a theft? Are the gods or those in power right to withhold fire from the masses? The answer shifts with each generation, but Prometheus's defiance remains timeless. Now turn from the Titan who defied the sky to the goddess who weaponized desire. If Prometheus challenged tyranny, her rivalry redefined the very nature of love and war, proving that some battles aren't fought with lightning, but with the human heart. Anat didn't just mourn her brother's death, she waged war on the Underworld itself. In Canaanite mythology, when Mot, the god of death, swallowed Baal, the storm god and Anat's beloved brother, she didn't weep or plead. She grabbed her weapons and descended into the realm of the dead, carving a path of destruction so brutal that even the texts hesitate to describe it fully. The ancient tablets say she split Mot with a sword, burned him with fire, ground him like grain, and scattered his remains across the fields. This wasn't just vengeance, it was annihilation. And it worked. With Mot temporarily defeated, Baal was resurrected, bringing life-giving rains back to the land. Anat's victory wasn't just personal, it was cosmic, proving that even death could be overturned by sheer force of will. But here's what makes Anat extraordinary. She defied every expectation. While most fertility goddesses of the ancient Near East, like Ishtar or Asherah, were celebrated for their nurturing roles, Anat was a paradox. She was both lover and destroyer, a goddess who could dance in the temple one moment and bathe in blood the next. Egyptian texts even describe her laughing as she decorates herself with the severed heads of her enemies. This duality terrified and fascinated her worshippers. In a world where women's roles were tightly controlled, Anat embodied unapologetic ferocity, a reminder that creation and destruction were two sides of the same blade. Her influence didn't stop at canon. Scholars trace echoes of Anat in later goddesses like Athena and Artemis, warrior women who refused to be confined by tradition. Even the biblical figure of Judith, who beheads an enemy general, carries shades of Anat's ruthless triumph. But here's the haunting question: why was Anat's cult eventually suppressed? Some argue it was political. As Canaanite cities fell to empires like Egypt and Assyria, their gods were absorbed or erased. Others suggest her violence became inconvenient, too destabilizing for the orderly pantheons of conquering cultures. The most chilling theory, that her worship was deliberately scrubbed from records because she represented something too powerful, a woman who answered to no one, not even death. Now, imagine a rival so dangerous that erasing their name wasn't enough, their very existence had to be rewritten. What happens when history's winners decide who gets to be a god and who gets to be a monster? Tezcatlipoca wasn't just a trickster, he was the ultimate divine provocateur, a god who turned rivalry into an art form. In Aztec mythology, his feud with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of wisdom and wind, wasn't merely personal. It was a cosmic battle over the soul of creation itself. Picture this: Quetzalcoatl, the bringer of civilization, ruling the golden age of Tolan, a city of peace and prosperity. Then comes Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, holding up a reflection of Quetzalcoatl's own flaws. He didn't attack with brute force, he weaponized illusion. One infamous myth tells how Tezcatlipoca disguised himself as an old man, offering Quetzalcoatl a drink of pulque, a fermented brew. The serpent god, intoxicated, shamed himself by breaking his vows of celibacy. The next morning, consumed by guilt, Quetzalcoatl fled into exile, setting himself on fire and vanishing into the eastern sky as the morning star. With one act of deception, Tezcatlipoca toppled an era. But this rivalry wasn't just about gods, it mirrored the Aztec worldview. Tezcatlipoca embodied chaos, change, and the unpredictable forces that could topple even the mightiest rulers. His name, Smoking Mirror, referred to the obsidian glass used for divination, a symbol of how truth could be distorted, how power was always fragile. Surviving prayers to him reveal a chilling duality. One hymn pleads, "You are the night, the wind, you are the Lord of all things," while another warns, "Do not mock us, do not toy with us." The Aztecs didn't just fear him, they acknowledged his necessity. Without Tezcatlipoca's disruptions, the world would stagnate. Even Quetzalcoatl's exile wasn't permanent. Prophecies foretold his return, suggesting cycles of destruction and renewal were baked into the universe. Modern scholars see deeper layers here. Tezcatlipoca's tricks often exposed hypocrisy, like when he humiliated a proud king by revealing his mortality through a hallucination of invading armies. These stories may reflect real tensions in Aztec society, the anxiety of rulers who knew their power rested on fragile alliances, the fear that even the greatest cities could fall to deception or drought. Tezcatlipoca's cult thrived because he represented uncomfortable truths. That order was temporary, that no one, not even a god, was immune to downfall. Now shift from divine trickery to raw, elemental fury. If Tezcatlipoca's rivalry was a game of mirrors, the next god's conflict was a force of nature, literally. Their battles didn't just shake temples, they reshaped the earth itself. Set wasn't always the villain of Egyptian mythology. In fact, he was once one of its greatest protectors. Long before he was branded as the murderer of Osiris and the eternal adversary of Horus, Set stood as the defender of Ra's solar bark, the god who fought Apep's chaos with unmatched ferocity. His raw strength and stormy power were celebrated, his role as a necessary counterbalance to order cemented in early dynastic Egypt. Kings took his name as a badge of honor, invoking his might to crush their enemies. So how did the god of deserts and storms become the embodiment of evil? The answer lies in a shift not just of theology but of politics. When the cult of Osiris rose to prominence, Set's story was rewritten. Osiris, the god of the afterlife and fertility, represented the Nile's life-giving predictability, while Set embodied the harsh, unpredictable desert. Their conflict wasn't just mythological, it mirrored the tension between Upper Egypt, where Set was revered, and Lower Egypt, where Osiris dominated. The famous myth of Set murdering and dismembering Osiris, only for Horus to avenge his father, reads like propaganda, a way to justify sidelining Set's worshippers as Egypt unified under a single religious identity. Even the 80-year battle between Horus and Set for the throne carries political undertones. Horus, the rightful heir, versus Set, the usurper. Except in some versions, Set was the legitimate ruler until Horus challenged him. The gods' eventual compromise, splitting the kingdom between them, feels less like divine justice and more like a forced truce between rival factions. Yet Set's legacy refuses to stay buried. Modern pagans and occultists see him differently, not as evil, but as a necessary force of upheaval. In a world that fears change, Set represents the storm that clears the way for new growth. His followers argue that without destruction, there can be no renewal, and without chaos, order becomes stagnation. Some even link him to revolutionary figures, casting him as the divine rebel who challenges corrupt systems. Archaeologists have found evidence that Set's worship persisted in secret long after his demonization, a testament to the enduring appeal of the god who refused to bow. Now shift from a god maligned by his own pantheon to one whose rivalry spanned cultures. The next deity didn't just clash with his divine peers, he waged war across the boundaries of belief itself, proving that even gods could become prisoners of conquest. Angra Mainyu didn't just oppose Ahura Mazda, he defined the very concept of evil. In Zoroastrianism, the world's first monotheistic religion, this wasn't a petty feud between gods. It was the original battle between light and darkness, order and chaos, truth and deception. Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, created all that was good: the earth, the stars, the very fabric of existence. But Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, twisted everything he touched, birthing disease, death, and deceit. Their conflict wasn't confined to some distant celestial realm. It played out in every human choice, every moment of moral struggle. This was the birth of dualism, the idea that the universe itself was a battleground and every person had to pick a side. What makes this rivalry groundbreaking is how it reshaped spirituality forever. Before Zoroastrianism, ancient religions often saw gods as capricious, blending benevolence and cruelty in unpredictable ways. But Angra Mainyu introduced something radical: pure, unadulterated malevolence. He wasn't a god you bargained with or appeased. He was the enemy, the antithesis of all that was holy. This binary world, you didn't just influence Persia, it echoed through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The devil, Satan, Iblis, these figures all carry traces of Angra Mainyu's legacy. Even the concept of a final judgment, where good triumphs over evil eternally, finds its roots in Zoroastrian eschatology. Yet there's a twist: Angra Mainyu wasn't an equal rival. Ahura Mazda held the upper hand, destined to win in the end. This wasn't a balanced duality, but a temporary struggle, a test of human free will. Followers of Zoroaster believed their actions could tip the scales, feeding Ahura Mazda's fire of righteousness or strengthening Angra Mainyu's shadows. Modern scholars argue this gave believers agency, turning faith into activism. You couldn't just pray for salvation, you had to live it, fighting corruption, dishonesty, and lethargy in daily life. Now, imagine a rival who broke the ultimate taboo, not by embracing evil, but by defying the roles assigned to her. If Angra Mainyu represented cosmic destruction, our next goddess shattered expectations in a way that unsettled even the gods themselves. Her rebellion wasn't against order, but against tradition, proving that some boundaries were meant to be crossed. Baba Yaga wasn't just a witch lurking in the forest, she was a cosmic wildcard, a force so unpredictable even Perun, the mighty Slavic thunder god, couldn't control her. While Perun wielded lightning and commanded the skies, Baba Yaga ruled the spaces in between, the crossroads, the thresholds, the moments when day tips into night. Her hut spun on chicken legs, defying the laws of nature, just as she defied the hierarchy of the gods. Unlike Perun, who symbolized order and strength, Baba Yaga embodied ambiguity. She might help a seeker one day and devour them the next, not out of cruelty, but because she answered to no one's rules but her own. This tension between Perun's authority and Baba Yaga's anarchy reflects a deeper cultural divide. Perun was the god of princes and warriors, his worship tied to power and conquest. But Baba Yaga's roots stretch back to older, earthier traditions, a guardian of secrets, a keeper of the wild, untamed world that refused to bow to civilization. In some tales, she even holds the keys to the afterlife, a role that pits her directly against Perun's dominion over life and death. Their rivalry wasn't fought with weapons, but through stories. Perun's myths glorified victory, while Baba Yaga's tales celebrated cunning, transformation, and the unsettling truth that not all questions have clear answers. What's most fascinating is how Baba Yaga's defiance resonates today. She's been reclaimed as a feminist icon, a symbol of resistance against rigid systems. Where Perun's power was absolute, hers was fluid. She could be mother, monster, or mentor, depending on the tale. Modern pagans see her as a reminder that wisdom often lives in the margins, not the centers of power. Even her hut, neither fully house nor creature, mirrors her role as a liminal being straddling the line between divine and mortal, order and chaos. Now shift from the forest's edge to the halls of heroes, where a god's rivalry wasn't just whispered in folktales, it was shouted in epic verse. The next contender didn't just challenge authority, he turned his feud into the stuff of legend, proving that even the greatest gods could fall to a well-sung insult. Ravana wasn't just a demon king, he was a paradox wrapped in 10 heads and 20 arms, a villain so layered that Hindu scriptures still debate his legacy. On one hand, he was the ultimate adversary, the Rakshasa who abducted Sita and sparked Rama's epic quest in the Ramayana. But peel back the surface, and you'll find a ruler of unmatched intellect, a devotee of Shiva who composed hymns so beautiful they moved the gods themselves. His kingdom, Lanka, wasn't some shadowy underworld. It was a glittering metropolis, a testament to his genius as a scholar, warrior, and architect. So how did a figure of such brilliance become mythology's most infamous kidnapper? The answer lies in the fine line between ambition and hubris, and who gets to write the story. Ravana's defiance of Rama wasn't mindless evil. In some regional versions of the Ramayana, especially in Southeast Asia, he's cast as a tragic hero, a king who genuinely believed Sita was his destined queen. His fatal flaw wasn't cruelty but pride, the same pride that led him to challenge even the heavens. Legend says he once lifted Mount Kailash to uproot Shiva's home, only for the god to casually press the mountain down, trapping Ravana beneath it. Yet Shiva, impressed by his audacity, granted him boons that made him nearly invincible. That's the irony of Ravana, his greatest strengths, his intellect, his devotion, his refusal to bow, became the chains that bound him to destruction. When he ignored the warnings of his wiser brother Vibhishana, when he dismissed the humility Rama embodied, he wasn't just opposing a prince, he was rejecting the cosmic order itself. Modern interpretations of Ravana reveal even more nuance. Dalit and anti-caste scholars sometimes reclaim him as a symbol of resistance against Brahminical hierarchy, a figure who dared to rival the ideal king, Rama. In Sri Lanka, he's celebrated as a national hero, a patron of arts and sciences whose demonization, they argue, was colonial propaganda. Even the Ramayana hints at this complexity. Before his final battle, Ravana delivers a profound discourse on statecraft to his son, a moment that feels less like a villain's rant and more like a philosopher king's last lesson. His death, pierced by Rama's arrow, isn't just a triumph of good over evil, it's a meditation on the cost of unchecked power. Now, shift from a king who challenged gods to a rivalry that transcended myth and spilled onto canvases, stages, and sculptures for centuries. If Ravana's story forces us to question who labels heroes and villains, the next deity's conflict became a muse for artists across millennia, proof that some divine battles never truly end. Mara wasn't just a demon, he was the ultimate test. In Buddhist tradition, when Siddhartha Gautama sat beneath the Bodhi tree on the brink of enlightenment, Mara appeared not with hellfire or brute force, but with temptation's sharpest tools. He unleashed armies of demons, yes, but also sent his daughters embodiments of desire, doubt, and distraction to sway the future Buddha. This wasn't mere villainy, it was a cosmic trial, a final exam for the soul. Mara's role wasn't to destroy Siddhartha but to refine him, forcing the prince to confront every lingering attachment before claiming awakening. The brilliance of this rivalry. Mara's defeat didn't come through battle. Siddhartha simply touched the earth, calling it as his witness, and Mara's illusions shattered. The lesson was clear: enlightenment isn't won by fighting darkness, but by seeing through it. Comparing Mara to Satan reveals a profound philosophical split. In Christianity, Satan is the adversary, a fallen angel who tempts humanity toward eternal damnation. But Mara is more like a mirror, a reflection of the inner struggles every seeker must face. He doesn't rule a hell, he personifies the hurdles on the path to liberation. Where Satan's temptations lead to sin, Mara's challenges expose the ego's grip. Even his name, meaning death or destroyer, hints at his true function, to dismantle illusions, not souls. Modern Buddhists sometimes frame Mara as a paradoxical teacher, the sandpaper that smooths the wood, the resistance that strengthens the meditator's focus. Now consider this twist. What if rivals were once allies? In some Tibetan traditions, Mara isn't purely evil but a deity who took on a necessary role, like an actor playing the villain in a sacred drama. This reframes their confrontation as a dance of interdependence, where enlightenment needs obstacles to be meaningful. It's a radical idea that even the forces opposing wisdom might secretly serve it. Shift now from a tempter who tests enlightenment to a goddess who weaponized memory itself. If Mara was the illusionist, our next rival was the keeper of stories too dangerous to forget and too painful to remember. The Morrigan didn't just predict fate, she shaped it with a whisper and a smirk. In Celtic mythology, this goddess of war, fate, and sovereignty was no passive seer. She was a provocateur, a warrior, and at times a lover whose clashes with the Dagda, the father god of life and abundance, revealed a deeper tension over who truly controlled destiny. Their most infamous encounter happened on the eve of battle. The Morrigan offered the Dagda a prophecy of victory, but with a catch. She demanded his intimacy in exchange, a union that blurred the lines between political alliance and divine manipulation. The Dagda, no stranger to strategy, agreed. Yet when the battle came, the Morrigan didn't just watch from the sidelines. She waded into the fray, shape shifting between crow, wolf, and washerwoman, her presence both a blessing and a taunt. To those she favored, she whispered secrets of survival. To those she scorned, she appeared washing their blood-stained armor before they'd even fallen, a chilling omen of their doom. This rivalry wasn't just about power, it was about perspective. The Dagda embodied the cyclical, nurturing force of the land, his cauldron overflowing with endless sustenance. The Morrigan, however, represented the harsh truth that all abundance comes at a cost. Her prophecies weren't gentle warnings but brutal revelations, forcing kings and gods alike to confront the price of their ambitions. In some tales, she even incited wars, not out of cruelty, but to thin the unworthy, a divine Darwinism that ensured only the strong would rule. Yet paradoxically, she was also a guardian of warriors, offering protection to those who honored her with courage or cunning. This duality made her terrifying and irresistible, a goddess who couldn't be pinned to a single role. Modern scholars see her as a reflection of Celtic society's complex relationship with sovereignty. Kings didn't just inherit thrones, they had to prove their worth, often through trials or symbolic marriages to the land, a concept the Morrigan embodied. Her rivalry with the Dagda wasn't hatred, it was a dance of checks and balances, ensuring no single force, be it life or death, peace or war, could dominate unchecked. Even her name, Morrigan, is debated. Some translate it as Phantom Queen, others as Great Queen, a testament to her elusive nature. But not all divine rivalries ended in uneasy balance. Some fractured into betrayal so deep it echoed through the ages. Imagine a god who trusted his kin, only to learn too late that blood ties meant nothing in the face of ambition. His story begins not with a prophecy but with a feast and a knife hidden beneath the table. Izanami's death should have been the end of her story, but in Japanese mythology, it was only the beginning of her divine vengeance. When she perished giving birth to the fire god Kagetsuchi, Her grief-stricken husband Izanagi followed her to Yomi, the underworld, desperate to bring her back. But what he found there shattered their love forever. Izanami, once the radiant co-creator of Japan's islands and gods, had become something else, a decaying, wrathful figure bound to the land of the dead. She warned Izanagi not to look at her, but in his terror he lit a torch, and the sight of her rotting flesh horrified him into fleeing. Her humiliation ignited a fury so profound that she vowed to kill 1,000 humans daily, while Izanagi countered by pledging to create 1,500. In that moment, their love didn't just die, it birthed death itself as a cosmic force. This wasn't just a marital spat, it was a theological earthquake. Izanami's transformation codified one of Shinto's core taboos, kegare, the impurity of death. Her lingering rage explained why corpses were considered spiritually polluting, why mourners had to undergo purification rituals. Even Izanagi's frantic escape carried symbolic weight. His washing of Yomi's contamination from his body birthed new deities, including Amaterasu, the sun goddess. The myth framed death not as natural, but as a rupture, a betrayal that fractured the divine order. Yet Izanami's underworld sovereignty also revealed a paradox. She wasn't just a victim or monster, but a ruler. In some regional cults, she was worshipped as a guardian of the dead, a figure who could grant safe passage to souls. Her duality, creator and destroyer, beloved and betrayed, mirrored Japan's own ambivalence toward endings, were they tragedies or transitions. Now shift from a rivalry that split life and death to one that stitched cultures together. Far to the west, where the Nile meets the Mediterranean, another goddess embodied a different kind of division and fusion. Her name wasn't erased by conquest, it was whispered in 2 languages claimed by 2 peoples, and her story proved that even the fiercest divine rivals could become entwined. The lords of Xibalba didn't just rule the underworld, they turned death into a sport. In Maya mythology, their most infamous clash wasn't fought with swords or spells, but in the roaring courts of the sacred bowl game, where the hero twins, Hanapu and Exbalanque, faced off against the gods of decay in a match that echoed through the cosmos. Picture this, a game where the stakes weren't just victory or defeat, but the very fate of the sun and the souls of the dead. The Xibalba lords' figures like 1 death and 7 death weren't mere monsters. They were master players, their court a labyrinth of traps and illusions designed to break even the bravest challengers. When the twins arrived, they weren't just playing for glory. They were out to avenge their father, a ball player himself, whose severed head had been hung from a calabash tree as a trophy. This myth wasn't just entertainment, it was a blueprint for life and death. The ball game, known as pits, mirrored the movement of the sun across the sky, its rubber ball symbolizing the celestial body bouncing between the realms of light and darkness. Every time the twins outwitted a Xibalba lord, escaping the Blade House, surviving the Bat House, they weren't just surviving. They were resetting the balance between day and night, fertility and drought. Their final victory, tricking the lords into sacrificing themselves in a pit of fire, didn't just vanquish evil. It explained why the sun could rise again each morning, why crops regrew after harvest, because even the underworld's grip wasn't absolute. The twins' resurrection of their father, planting his bones to create the first maize, tied the myth to the agricultural cycles that sustained Maya civilization. Yet the Xibalba lords weren't just villains. Some scholars argue they represented necessary forces decay to make way for renewal, darkness to define light. Their ball game was a ritual, a way to channel chaos into order. Modern Maya communities still reenact these stories, not as tales of good versus evil, but as reminders that life's struggles are part of a grander cycle. Now shift from a cosmic game of survival to a rivalry that cut even closer. a divine family torn apart not by underworld tricks, but by jealousy, betrayal, and a throne that could only hold one. Ahriman wasn't just a destroyer, he was the architect of doubt, the shadow that crept into every human thought. In Persian Zoroastrian tradition, his eternal war with Spenta, the holy spirit of creation, wasn't just a cosmic clash, it was a battle waged in the hearts of mortals. While Spenta illuminated the path of righteousness, Ahriman whispered lies, weaving confusion into the fabric of existence. This wasn't abstract theology, it was a daily struggle. Farmers praying for rain might find their fields parched by Ahriman's drought. A king's just rule could be undone by his whispers of paranoia. Every act of cruelty, every moment of despair, was seen as his fingerprints on the world. Yet Ahriman's influence extended far beyond ancient Persia. His duality with Spenta became the blueprint for countless esoteric traditions. The Gnostics reframed this battle as the conflict between the false demiurge and the true, hidden god. Alchemists saw it in the tension between corruption and purification, the base lead struggling to become gold. Even modern psychology echoes this idea, the constant tug between our higher aspirations and our self-destructive impulses. Ahriman's genius was his insidious subtlety. He didn't need to conquer the world outright. He simply nudged humanity toward chaos, one compromised choice at a time. The most chilling part, Ahriman wasn't destined to lose. Zoroastrian texts describe a final reckoning, yes, but until then, the war raged on, and every soul was a battleground. This wasn't just myth, it was a call to action. Followers of Zoroaster believed they could tip the scales through good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, becoming soldiers in Spenta army. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just personal salvation, but the fate of creation itself. Now, imagine a force even Ahriman might fear, not a god of lies or storms, but one who wielded a far more unpredictable power. If Ahriman manipulated minds, our next rival mastered hearts, turning love into a weapon sharper than any sword. Freya and Frigg might seem like two sides of the same Norse goddess, both linked to love, fertility, and the sacred bonds of marriage, but dig deeper, and you'll find a rivalry as fierce as any battlefield clash. Freya, the wild, passionate sorceress who rode a chariot pulled by cats and wept golden tears for her missing husband, stood in stark contrast to Frigg, Odin's serene queen, weaver of destinies and keeper of domestic order. Their competition wasn't just personal, it was a cultural tug of war between two visions of feminine power. In southern Scandinavia, Freya's cult thrived, her name invoked in spells of Seder magic and whispered in rituals of sensual abundance. Meanwhile, Frigg's influence dominated the north, where her role as a wise, maternal figure aligned with the values of settled, agricultural communities. The tension between them crystallized in their shared connection to fate. Frigg supposedly knew every destiny but never spoke a word, her silence a symbol of stoic acceptance. Freya, however, actively shaped outcomes. Her magic could bend wills, her tears could buy back the dead. Even their ties to the afterlife revealed this divide. Frigg's chosen warriors found peace in her son Baldur's Hall, while Freya claimed half the slain for her own glittering field of Folkvanga. Some scholars argue they were once the same goddess, split by regional biases or political shifts. Freya's unapologetic sensuality perhaps too volatile for the emerging Norse elite. Yet traces of their struggle linger in the myths. When Odin disguised himself as a traveler to seduce Frigg, it echoed Freya's own tales of transformation and desire, as if their stories were mirrors warped by time. Even their sacred symbols, Frigg's spindle, Freya's necklace Brisingamen, hinted at a deeper entanglement, one that conquest and conversion tried to erase. Now turn from a rivalry etched in regional divides to one lost entirely, a god whose name was scraped from stone, whose cult was swallowed by the desert sands. His story begins not with a prayer but with silence. Coatlicue wasn't just a mother, she was a battlefield. In Aztec mythology, her story begins with something mundane, sweeping. As the earth goddess cleansed the temple at Coatepec, a ball of feathers fell from the sky, impregnating her with Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war. But her other children, the 400 star gods and their sister Coilxauhqui, saw this miracle as disgrace. Enraged, they plotted to kill her for dishonoring their family. What happened next wasn't just a family feud. It was the birth of an empire's divine mandate. As the siblings descended upon Coatlicue, Huitzilopochtli sprang from her womb fully armed, dismembering Coilxauhqui and hurling her body down the mountain. Her shattered form became the moon, a perpetual reminder of rebellion's cost. This myth wasn't just storytelling, it was propaganda carved in stone. The Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan literally replicated Coatepec, with Coilxauhqui's stone disc placed at its base, symbolizing the Aztecs' conquered enemies. Every captured warrior sacrificed on its steps reenacted her fall, their bodies tumbling like celestial debris. Huitzilopochtli's victory justified Aztec expansion. Their wars weren't aggression but cosmic duty, a never-ending battle to stave off chaos. Yet Coatlicue's role is often overshadowed. She wasn't just a victim, she was the earth itself, fertile and fearsome, her skirt of writhing serpents embodying both life and death. Modern scholars argue her myth reflects deeper tensions, the Aztecs' own rise from obscurity, their need to legitimize violence through divine narrative. But here's the haunting question: could Coilxauhqui ever be redeemed? Some contemporary Mexica activists reclaim her as a symbol of resistance, her rebellion reframed as righteous defiance against a militaristic regime. Artists reimagine her not as shattered but as whole, a celestial warrior in her own right. Even Coatlicue's duality, creator and destroyer, hints at a cyclical view of power, where today's victor might be tomorrow's sacrifice. The Aztec Empire fell, after all, and the temples built to glorify Huitzilopochtli now lie beneath Mexico City's streets. Perhaps the true lesson of this rivalry isn't about winning, but about how myths outlive the gods they're meant to serve. Now shift from a goddess swallowed by conquest to one who defied it entirely. If Coatlicue's story was written by the victors, our next deity refused to be erased even when her name was forbidden. Her power didn't fade, it went underground, proving that some rivals can't be silenced with stone or sword. Vritra wasn't just a dragon, he was the living embodiment of drought, a serpent so massive his coiled body dammed the rivers and strangled the skies. In Hindu mythology, when this primordial beast stole the waters of the world, leaving the land cracked and lifeless, the storm god Indra rose to challenge him. The battle was legendary, thunderbolts shattering scales, the earth trembling as Vritra's gargantuan form collapsed, releasing the torrents that revived the plains. On the surface, it's a classic tale of hero versus monster, but peel back the layers and the moral clarity evaporates, because Vritra wasn't some mindless destroyer. Ancient texts hint he was once a sage, a being of wisdom cursed into serpent form. Some versions even suggest he was the rightful guardian of the waters, holding them back to prevent catastrophic floods. Indra's victory, celebrated in hymns as a triumph of order, might have been less about salvation and more about conquest, a younger god overthrowing an older force of nature. Ecologists today reframe the myth as an allegory for humanity's fraught relationship with natural balance. Vritra's restraint of the waters mirrors the necessity of droughts in regenerative cycles, while Indra's unchecked release symbolizes humanity's tendency to force short-term solutions with long-term consequences. The Rigveda itself wavers, calling Vritra both the darkness and the coverer, a duality that complicates who the real villain was. This tension between preservation and progress echoes in modern India, where monsoons are both lifeline and destroyer. Farmers still pray to Indra for rain, yet ancient reservoirs built to harness Vritra's withheld waters stand as relics of a more nuanced understanding. Perhaps the myth's deepest lesson is that rivalry isn't always about good versus evil. Sometimes it's a clash of competing necessities where the victor writes the story. Now shift from a battle over nature's rhythms to one that forged a people's soul. If Vritra and Indra embodied ecological tension, the next rivalry was a crucible of national identity, a god whose defiance became the heartbeat of a civilization's resistance. Sekhmet didn't just punish humanity, she nearly erased it. In Egyptian mythology, when Ra grew furious with mankind's disobedience, he unleashed his daughter, the lioness goddess of war and healing, to teach them a lesson. But Sekhmet's vengeance spiraled beyond control. Her roar split the sky as she tore through villages, her claws dripping with blood, her hunger for destruction insatiable. The Nile ran red, not with water, but with the consequences of divine wrath. The gods watched in horror as their creation teetered on annihilation until someone devised a desperate plan. They flooded Sekhmet's path with beer dyed crimson to mimic blood. The lioness goddess, mistaking it for human carnage, drank until she collapsed into a stupor, her rampage finally halted by deception rather than force. This myth raises a haunting question. Was Sekhmet's violence justified, or did it expose the dangers of unchecked power? On one hand, humanity had rebelled against Ra, challenging the cosmic order. Sekhmet's fury wasn't random, it was divine retribution, a purging of corruption. Yet the scale of her slaughter suggests something darker, a goddess intoxicated by her own brutality, unable to distinguish justice from bloodlust. Modern scholars debate whether this story reflects real historical trauma, a plague, a failed harvest, or a cautionary tale about the dual nature of Sekhmet herself. She wasn't just a destroyer, she was also a healer, her priests invoking her to cure diseases. This duality forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the forces that protect us are also the ones most capable of devastation. The myth's resolution, tricking Sekhmet with beer, adds another layer. Why couldn't the gods stop her outright? Perhaps because her power was too primal, too entwined with creation itself. To destroy her would unravel the balance she represented. Instead, they outsmarted her, turning her own hunger against her. It's a theme that echoes across cultures, the idea that even gods must sometimes be deceived for the world to survive. Now shift from a goddess pacified by cunning to a deity whose rivalry sparked underground devotion. If Sekhmet's wrath was tempered by trickery, the next god's defiance was so potent, his followers worshipped him in secret, long after his name was scrubbed from temples. His story begins not with a roar, but with a whisper. Chernobog wasn't just a name, it was a warning. In Slavic mythology, this so-called black god lurked in the shadows of folklore, a figure so enigmatic that scholars still debate whether he was ever truly worshipped or merely invented as a foil to Belobog, the radiant white god. The duality seems straightforward, light versus darkness, good versus evil, but dig deeper and the story unravels like a tangled thread. The earliest mentions of Chernobog come not from ancient Slavic hymns, but from Christian chroniclers, outsiders who might have twisted local beliefs to fit their own narrative of cosmic struggle. Imagine a scribe's quill dipping into ink, not just to record, but to redefine, turning a complex deity into a simplistic devil. What makes Chernobog fascinating isn't just his potential misrepresentation, but what he reveals about the politics of myth-making. In some regional traditions, darkness wasn't inherently evil. It was the fertile void from which creation emerged, the necessary counterbalance to light. Chernobog might have symbolized winter's harshness or the inevitability of death, forces that were feared but also respected. Yet under the pen of medieval chroniclers like Helmold of Bossau, he became a Slavic Satan, a figure to be reviled rather than understood. This wasn't just translation, it was theological conquest, a way to frame indigenous beliefs as primitive or malevolent. Modern pagans and scholars push back, arguing that Chernobog's vilification reflects cultural bias, not historical truth. The irony, Belobog, his supposed counterpart, is just as elusive. Some argue he was never a major deity at all, but a later invention to complete the duality imposed by outsiders. If true, it means both gods might be mirrors held up to Slavic spirituality reflections, distorted by the hands of those who sought to simplify what they didn't comprehend. The real rivalry here isn't between light and darkness, but between authentic tradition and the stories overwritten upon it. Now, shift from a god possibly forged by scribes to one whose division of the heavens was anything but imaginary. The next rivalry didn't just split the pantheon, it cracked the sky itself, leaving a scar that shaped the destiny of gods and mortals alike. Camazotz wasn't just a bat, he was the embodiment of every primal fear that lurks in the dark. In Maya mythology, this monstrous deity ruled the House of Bats, a cavernous underworld realm where his very breath could slice through flesh like obsidian blades. When the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, ventured into Xibalba's depths, Camazotz wasn't waiting with armies or spells. He struck with silence, his winged form swooping down to sever Hunahpu's head in a single, brutal motion. The decapitation wasn't just violence, it was symbolic. Here was a god who didn't just kill, he obliterated identity, leaving his victims nameless and forgotten in the underworld's gloom. But Camazotz's legacy stretches far beyond ancient Mesoamerica. His imagery, a humanoid bat with dagger-like fangs and leathery wings, haunts modern vampire lore. Scholars trace parallels between him and the Tezcatlipoca, Aztec star demons who took bat-like forms, or even the Camazotz-inspired creatures in Guatemalan folklore that still terrify villagers today. The resemblance to Dracula isn't coincidence. It's proof of how deeply this god's mythos infiltrated the collective psyche. Where European vampires seduced, Camazotz didn't bother with charm. His power was sheer, unadulterated terror, a reminder that darkness doesn't just hide monsters, it is the monster. Yet there's a twist. In some Maya traditions, Camazotz wasn't purely evil. His bats pollinated the sacred ceiba tree, linking him to life as much as death. This duality forces us to reconsider his role in the hero twins saga. Was he truly a villain, or a necessary trial, a force that tested their courage by confronting them with the one thing even gods fear? The unknown. Modern Maya communities sometimes depict him as a guardian of thresholds, a deity who didn't just punish the unworthy but purified them. Now shift from a god who ruled the shadows to one whose rivalry illuminated the clash of empires. If Camazotz symbolized fear's intimate grip, the next deity's conflict was writ large across history, a divine struggle that mirrored the collision of two worlds. Nyx didn't bow to Zeus, she didn't even flinch. In the pantheon of Greek gods, where the king of Olympus ruled with thunderbolts and terror, the primordial goddess of night stood apart, a force so ancient and unfathomable that even Zeus knew better than to command her. Homer's Iliad reveals the moment when Hypnos, the god of sleep, admits he wouldn't dare cross Zeus unless Nyx shielded him. And when Zeus did rage, realizing Hypnos had tricked him, his fury cooled the instant he saw Nyx's shadow. No threats, no punishment, just silence. This wasn't respect, it was primal recognition. Nyx existed before the Olympians, before the Titans, even before chaos itself. She wasn't just a goddess, she was the living embodiment of night, a darkness so absolute it could swallow lightning itself. What made Nyx untouchable? The answer lies in her origins. While Zeus wielded power, Nyx was power, an elemental truth woven into the fabric of existence. Her children weren't just deities, they were the ungovernable forces of fate and suffering, Thanatos death, the Morai fates, and Nemesis retribution. Even the Furies, those relentless avengers, sprang from her blood. The Olympians ruled the world, but Nyx's domain was the void between stars, the inevitable decay of all things. No temple could contain her, no hymn could soften her. She didn't need worshippers because night comes regardless of prayer. This dynamic flips the Greek pantheon's hierarchy on its head. Zeus toppled the Titans by force, yet he couldn't lay a finger on Nyx. Her resistance wasn't rebellion, it was indifference. While other gods schemed for altars and tribute, Nyx simply was, a reminder that some forces defy dominion. Modern scholars see her as a cosmic check on Olympian arrogance, a boundary even gods couldn't cross. Her night wasn't just absence of light, it was the limit of divine control. Now, as the shadows of Nyx's tale fade, one rival remains. A deity whose story doesn't just challenge the gods but redefines why these myths endure. The final figure in our saga isn't just a forgotten name, they're the key to understanding how rival gods shape history itself. Their rebellion wasn't against heaven, but against oblivion. Enlil and Enki weren't just brothers, they were opposing philosophies carved into the bedrock of Sumerian civilization. Enlil, the god of wind and storms, ruled with unshakable authority, his decrees as immutable as the laws of nature. When humanity grew too loud, too restless, it was Enlil who unleashed the great flood to wipe them clean, viewing mortals as little more than a nuisance in the divine order. But Enki, the god of wisdom and waters, saw things differently. Where Enlil demanded obedience, Enki whispered secrets. When the floodwaters rose, it was Enki who warned the righteous king Ziusudra to build an ark, smuggling survival into the hands of mortals like contraband. This wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was a cosmic debate over humanity's very purpose. Were humans meant to kneel or to learn? The tension between these gods shaped Mesopotamia's soul. Enlil's temple in Nippur stood as the religious heart of Sumer, a place where kings sought legitimacy through his stern approval. Yet in Eridu, Enki's cult thrived among artisans and healers, his followers mastering the arts of magic, medicine, and irrigation gifts he'd stolen from the divine realm to elevate humanity. Their clashes weren't petty, they were ideological earthquakes. In the myth of Enki and Ninmah, Enki outwits the mother goddess in a contest to shape imperfect humans, proving that flaws could be strengths in disguise. Enlil would have crafted obedient drones. Enki championed adaptability, even if it meant chaos. Modern scholars see their feud as a metaphor for civilization's growing pains. Enlil embodies the old god, clinging to hierarchy and control, while Enki represents innovation's messy, liberating spark. Even their domains reflect this. Enlil's winds are unpredictable destruction, while Enki's waters carefully channeled bring life. The irony, Sumer's greatest achievements, from ziggurats to legal codes, emerged from this tension between order and ingenuity. So who truly shaped myth? The gods who ruled, or the rivals who challenged them? Enlil and Enki's struggle birthed stories that still resonate because they mirror our own dilemmas. Every time humanity debates authority versus freedom, tradition versus progress, we're replaying their ancient conflict. The most enduring myths aren't about victory, but balance. The recognition that divine rivals like storm and sea carve the world together even as they clash. These 26 rival gods aren't just footnotes in mythology, they're the hidden architects of belief itself. Every clash, every betrayal, every cosmic power struggle reveals something startling. Conflict doesn't just destroy, it creates. From Apep's nightly battles with Ra to Ereshkigal's brutal humiliation of Ishtar, these stories weren't merely entertainment. They were mirrors held up to the societies that worshipped them, reflecting their darkest fears, their unspoken tensions, their quiet rebellions. Think about it, when a culture silences a god, it's not just erasing a myth, it's rewriting history, scrubbing away the losers to glorify the victors. The Aztecs carved Coyolxauhqui's shattered body into temple steps. The Babylonians turned Tiamat's corpse into the heavens. Even Loki, the trickster who defied Odin, was bound in chains until Ragnarök. These aren't just endings, they're warnings. But why do these suppressed stories matter now? Because they prove that mythology was never static. It was a battleground, a living thing that shifted with every conquest, every political upheaval, every whispered heresy. The Morrigan's sovereignty rituals, Huitzilopochtli's rise from obscurity, Susano's exile, each reveals how gods were tools of control, symbols of resistance, or both. When the Spanish demonized Quetzalcoatl as a false idol, or when Christian scribes turned Chernobog into a Slavic Satan, they weren't just condemning deities. They were erasing worldviews, replacing complexity with simplicity, turning rivalries into propaganda. Yet here's the beautiful irony: these gods refused to stay buried. Fragments of their cults survived in folk traditions, in art, in the stubborn persistence of stories too powerful to die. Nyx's primordial darkness still humbles Zeus in forgotten hymns. Anat's blood-stained laughter echoes in warrior women across cultures, and Prometheus, his fire still burns in every fight for knowledge against tyranny. Their legacies challenge us to question the myths we've inherited, to ask who shaped them and why. So now we turn to you. Which rival god's story resonated most? Was it the tragic defiance of Ravana, the scholar king turned demon, the eerie duality of Baba Yaga, who answered to no one? Or maybe Sekhmet, the healer who nearly drowned the world in blood? The comments are yours. Share the deity who made you rethink mythology's edges. And if you're hungry for more deep dives into history's shadows, hit subscribe. Because the untold stories, they are just getting started.